Welcome to Surround Presents, the podcast uncovering the untold stories and breakthrough ideas shaping the world of design. From bold innovations to behind-the-scenes insights, we explore the people, projects, and perspectives redefining the built environment. Each episode highlights standout voices from the Surround Network alongside thoughtful collaborations with industry partners, delivering fresh inspiration for designers, architects, and creative leaders everywhere.
It doesn't matter what gets thrown at you. It doesn't matter how big the screen is or how small the screen is or how much time you spend on it. If we can change that relationship from one of consumption to one of creation, then that's really different.
Welcome to NeoConversations, where we explore the people, perspectives, and ideas shaping the future of design. I'm your host, Nubia Henderson. And on today's episode, presented by IDCEC, we are joined by none other than David Shing, described by Forbes as an artist, globe-trotting speaker, and market seeker. Shingy is a storyteller who identifies emerging trends and inspires clients to think differently. He serves as a trusted consultant to the world's top 100 brands. Whether shaping global media strategies, reimagining identities, or counseling executives on enlightened futures, Shingy continues to revolutionize industries with an alchemy of imagination, instinct, and impact. His legacy is not defined by following trends, but creating them, turning ideas into world-shifting realities. David graced the NeoCon stage as our Day 3 keynote speaker. It was so great to have this conversation with Shingy, literally walking through the halls of the Mart. Let's get into today's episode. Shingy, we were having a great conversation walking the halls of the Mart, which is very NeoConversations, and reflecting on points in your talk, Design for an Evolving World. We were just discussing inputs that our children receive, but not just our children, like people, everyday people that they receive, and how people in the workplace, myself included, right? We have these fidgets, things to kind of like relieve pressure from outer inputs. And so I want you to talk a little bit about what that looks like in the workplace. And I don't even want to name it, but we've talked about it a lot, labels that people place on how our bodies naturally respond to these additional inputs as the world like rapidly evolves with the speed of technology, right? And the impetus from your presentation was like, hey, technology is moving fast, but we're demanding to go back to analog. So just touch on that a little bit.
There's something very special about the space that we're in, though, because it's really designed for consideration.
Yes.
And we're told that the digital sensorial is the one that matters most because it's the one you spend most of your time in. But that time that you spend in it is more typically absorbing, not creating. And the dynamic, I think, that needs to be re-engineered is, particularly in the workplace, you should be creating.
Yes.
And how do you create a dynamic of creation? By introducing sort of more dynamic relationship. Now, I've noticed in the last couple of decades of being around certainly US-based work culture or European-based work culture, I would say generally, is that we're trying to force creativity into a square peg into a round hole. And what do I mean by that is, particularly in the tech sector, most people work at an office environment that tries to force creativity in a way that feels uncreative.
Yes.
So they create environments that supposedly are creative, like a sleep pod room and an aquarium observatory, or a hot air balloon with a Martian, or a DJ deck and a skateboard rink. Like things that feel like they should be culturally in touch, but they're out of touch because they don't really focus on the first dynamic of human creativity. And that starts with you and I. How do you create an environment that lets your creativity flourish? It means you've got to give people the right environment to do that, and most people don't. And sort of what's happening is that in these environments that you spend a lot of time in front of a screen, how do you reverse that? Analog is becoming incredibly important because two things are happening. One, people are demanding more people go back to a workplace. But when you are, instead of emulating a remote space, which is sitting with headphones in front of a screen, trying to communicate, how do you actually create an environment where people work with each other, not around each other? And that's the new piece to this. Now, you talk about things like fidgeting or fidgets. That's really what that is doing, is allowing you to do more dynamic thinking. Instead of the basic ordering of ideas, top left, bottom right, in terms of the idea of scribbling, the idea of radiating, if you look at nature, look at things like trees and you look at things that actually have a root and a core and a trunk and it radiates out.
Yeah.
If you look at the way the human design from the heart to the center and it radiates all through our veins to our body, what's amazing about that, if you take that into the workplace and say, if we start with you as the person and allow you to radiate out, those dynamics are going to change, and so should the workflow. So do you doodle, by the way? Are you a doodler? So if you're sitting,
I'm not a doodler, I'm a dancer.
But so if you're sitting in a meeting where you can't fidget as much or dance as much, do you scribble around on a notepad?
No, I get up and take a movement break.
But do you see many people who do?
We actually had a talk last year called Doodle to Innovate, and she created designs from just that. She was at work, she was doing doodles, and then it turned into a product line. So yes.
So what those doodles do is they record memory. And people, when they grow up, going through the typical education system, when you're doodling, you would get in trouble. But the truth is, what you're doing is you're using what you need to do to record that memory. And that memory of doodle is far more impactful because of the visual cortex, the way that eyes and memory work in terms of recording information is way more dynamic than writing the word down. It's like when you used to go to university and you scribble down every single word from the lecture and think, oh, slow down because you're speaking too fast, I can't write everything down. If you were to use mind maps or if you were to do radiant thinking or if you were to do doodling, you're recording those instances. Part of that's also what you're doing now. As a mover, you need that thing in your hand to help you ground, to help your thinking.
Yes.
And that's an important piece of nature. Now imagine taking that dynamic and putting that into a workplace. A lot of us are trying to figure out what that means. Many times you'll go into a boardroom and on the table are a whole bunch of Lego bricks. And it's like, let's try and manifest something amazing out of these things.
So again, it's so cool that you're bringing that up because Momentum actually just had that with the...
Oh, they did?
Yes, with the workshop, the Rhythm Made materials. They were all cream.
Oh, they were
Lego
one
blocks. Yeah, to make cities. So that's very cool. Yeah.
Because what happens if you abstract it and you take one thing away or some things away, like primaries, and you're left with one monocolor, what happens with the thinking? Then it maybe becomes patterns. And those patterns become repeatable. For somebody like Momentum, I get it because they're repeatable patterns. So things can be dynamic. We could do something small in 1 foot or could be big as 1,000 feet, and that pattern could be repeatable. And that becomes very dynamic in its own right. But in the talk this morning about what I really wanted to emulate was it's human after all. It doesn't matter what gets thrown at you. It doesn't matter how big the screen is or how small the screen is or how much time you spend on it. If we can change that relationship from one of consumption to one of creation, then that's really different. And by the way, creation to you might be to create a video where you're dancing. Somebody else's idea of creating might be participating in commenting on a story, but they're thoughtful in their commentary.
Yes, absolutely.
As opposed to people who just sit and lurk and then sit there and just absorb all that content, and then you see it in their whites of their eyes. It's hard for them to break away from it. It's hard for them to come back into the real world. But real world experiences are becoming one of those dynamics that brands have left. So the beautiful thing is people still buy from people.
Yes.
For now. But when you are in real life, it should be real life dynamics. And I grew up in a time when you grew up in the 80s, those real world dynamics were there. They were very visceral. Screens introduced a world where there was less visceralness. But it turns out that the vast majority of young audiences today want to have community, and they want that community to be in real life. So what you'll see a lot of brands do, and obviously in the space that you're in, you see this all the time, particularly in dynamic workplaces, they want to create experiences that feel like enabled by the brand. And they feel like an extension of the brand because it's not just about consuming the brand's thing, it's about consuming the brand's culture, which is the entire lived-in experience.
So I want to lean in a little bit more to your personal life, but how I feel like it can help inform those that are listening. So we had a panel earlier in the week about Gen Z. I know you're raising a Gen Alpha daughter and you're world schooling her. So I want you to share about that experience and how you feel like this generation, because whether it's, brands or culture, like the world is evolving for this next generation, and how the way that they are currently showing up as Gen Z, saying, no, this isn't working for us. And then Gen Alpha, and your unique experience with raising your daughter to see, what did you say, 39 countries?
No, 79.
79 countries.
Yeah, it's a vibe. Also,
it is total vibe.
It's incredible privilege to be able to have, this young person tailgate us around the entire world, whether I do that with my honey and we travel as a family, or whether I take ocean by myself, which I did last year. I mean, one example is we traveled for 4 months together. We did 14 countries.
Wow.
But it wasn't passive. It wasn't just her watching me do speaking around the world or whatever, which is still a great dynamic. Because she was in the world, surrounded by the things that I do, one thing she does, she has a fashion brand.
Yeah.
So she has a T-shirt. She's done a couple of T-shirt collabs. I was wearing one of her T-shirts yesterday, which is an embroidered saying. I'm wearing one of her bags as a prototype today for another series that she's doing. But what's interesting is because she did an entire outfit for me last year.
Yeah.
And somebody saw it on the street when I got papped and said, who's the designer for this? And I said, it's this young lady who's my daughter.
That's right.
And these people actually end up running one of the largest education conferences in the world, and they asked her to be a keynote. That would not happen. Yeah, so she got to deliver a keynote last year in Stuttgart, Germany. But she wanted to create a publishing company. She wants to write books for kids, by kids. And she calls it The Good Lollipop. And she published her first book in her publishing company. And all of this was because she sees kids spending a lot of time on screens. Now, when she's in front of a screen, it's more productive. She's either listening to a podcast or...
Yes.
But some of her friends were spending a lot of time on screens and not engaging when she's trying to engage.
Yes.
So she wanted to create this publishing company that gives the contribution of that is to go and help fund villages where books are less apparent and reading may be less apparent.
Accessible.
But the thing that really, to your question, is that all seems pretty dynamic. A lot of times I've been speaking for the last 10 years or so about the polymath.
Yes.
So in the short time that you and I have known each other, you have many dynamics to your personality. And each one of those dynamics, they make up you in a totality. But most of us were taught, going through a very conservative way of doing business, this is how you show up at work, this is how you show up at play, this is your time at work, and when you're off the clock, then you are your own person, and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's absolute rubbish, because that's not true. When you go off the clock at this joint, you take that still home with you.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about audiences that allow to have the more of a dynamic work environment, show up as yourself, be yourself, all those dynamics, that rings true. Why? Because it's a reflection of culture. Brands are doing that, so why can't people do that? So it's got nothing to do with really their generation. It's got to do with the time.
The time.
And this time of permission is very important for them to capitalize upon it, which is why they can do that. However, this polymath, you and I are the same thing. Yeah. I mean, I have a million interests, and what I wanted to do was see if I can have a portfolio of those interests become commercially successful. Therefore, I'm living a fuller life. That's the dynamic of living with an artist and being married to an artist for all these years. She has to conceive the idea.
Yeah.
She has to go through the idea pregnancy. She has to birth the idea. She has to go through postpartum. She then has to go and do it all again and have more of these baby kids.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is that the workspaces haven't really typically done that. But more and more people are. So it's less about a generation, it's more about a time and a permission to do that.
Moment, yeah.
And if you're able to do that, that's dynamic. And so how do you take that dynamic environment into the workplace that blends those cultures, those lives together? And it's not been figured out because a work chair looks like a work chair in the home environment. It looks kind of weird.
That's
but
true.
my home environment looks really casual. But then is that the place where I can dynamically write a book? Actually, yeah. Or should that be a place where I can write an album? Actually, yeah. Should I do it in my workspace? I should be able to do that, but it hasn't inspired me to do so because it feels like my workspace. My office in New York, and I've done many spaces, interior designs, et cetera, which I love doing in construction because I just like the idea of making. So I had an office and I would have chairs hung on the wall.
We've had that installation.
So if you want
sounds like you need to come and hang out more
If
often.
you want to come have a meeting with me.
Yeah.
If you feel the need to sit down, you can. But you're going to have to work for it. And when you're done, you have to put the bloody thing back. Otherwise, we're standing up, we're keeping this dynamic, and it's going to be shorter than it would be if you sat down and pontificated.
Okay.
And for me, part of that was just making the relationship at meetings shorter and more dynamic and making them more concise and more...
I think that's honest to say we haven't figured it out and it's in process. I think a lot of times we just want to get to the answer and get to the thing. And when we get to the answer, we want to keep repeating that thing over and over instead of letting it evolve and saying we're in process. And that's a very real thing. We are very much so in process.
So if we think about in process, if I may, if you look at the different dynamics of the personality of people and being in a place where we're post-COVID, which feels like a million years ago.
A million,
There's either people who are like, I can't wait to get back to the way things were, which makes me cringe.
Because it's never coming back. Like we're in a different time.
And then how do you learn and do something different? There's those who haven't learned that. They want to be back in the office 5 days a week. There's still bigger lines for the free lunch than there are at the all-hand meetings.
Mm-hmm.
You've got people that can't work around others, so they still sit at the back. You've got others that are very happy hands, laugh at all the jokes and eat all the cheese and drink all the wine. They sit front row. I mean, those dynamics are trying to be forced back in. But what happens is that our personalities are different. Maybe you feel better in a quiet room and that's where your chaos reigns best. There are places who've designed for that because in the middle of COVID, you needed sound cones. You also needed to be protected, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you take some of those dynamics and create environments for people that fit the person? So those who need to be loud and proud can hang out with others that need that. And those of us who want to be quiet, we don't have to have our headphones on because we're in an environment that feels like it's cuddling us.
Yeah.
So how do you create those environments? Part of it's got to do with acoustics. Part of it's got to do with dynamic design. Some of it's got to do with surroundings, the sensorialness of how we feel in those environments. All of these things matter if we're actually going to conduce what? Creativity. To do what? Become more dynamic thinking. Do what? Create better ideas. To do what? Progress the business in ways that achieve its goals. It's not all just soft landing. These things really matter.
They do.
And things that typically don't matter is free food. But what does matter more is creating an environment for people's creativity to be amplified. We don't invest enough in creativity, and that creativity should be amplified through the surroundings of which we create ourselves in.
To create more dynamic ideas, more dynamic products from people being able to show up and be their authentic self because they have a space and environment that just naturally supports that.
Because once you feel those environments being tuned to the way of your needs, then your chaos can reign and your ideas can flourish, and they don't have to happen in places that felt like it's isolated in your time. They could be done in the work environment. We're still trying to figure that out. Otherwise, it'll end up being cost per seat. You know, let's look at marginalizing this and figuring out what we do with these spaces and, you know, what are the wasted spaces? And let's just talk about the more of the dynamic flow because we're not in the industrial age. We're working hundreds of hours a week.
Hundreds.
So this environment needs to be more attuned to what our needs are for us to flourish as creatives.
So I want to ask you a question in that regard. Where does choice show up in this evolution, right? Because we talked about world schooling. We're talking about sensory input and grounding. So where does choice show up? Like, and how does that play into placemaking as it relates to work?
I'm going to take two positions here. And the first one I will take is from the authority.
Okay.
Which is probably not the right position to take.
Okay.
But God damn it, I'm going to take it because there's a reason why they're incredible designers and why they exist. Taste, intuition, style, point of view are all trying to be automated. And when things get automated, you end up in homogenized environments.
Yes.
Whether that's interior spaces, whether that's car design, whether that's fashion. And if you're in that for too long, there becomes this push against it. If we're just sitting here listening to jazz all the time, we're not going to invent punk.
Right.
Or maybe the other way around. If we're just listening to rock and roll, we're not going to invent punk, which was influenced by jazz. So you need to create these genres. But that's for people that are probably on the fringe of creation, right? And what they do is they create something for the vast majority to feel comforted by. And that comforted is giving them the ability to say, my intuition and my gut tells me that this is exactly the environment for somebody to have a lasting impression to create something unique. If you say that it should be the person's choice, yeah, it should, but they probably don't know what to choose. So why not make them available to have some of those choices made, to know that this is the color they should wear, this is the dynamic environment they should be in, to maybe give them the ability to feel like it feels like I'm making a choice, but it's been curated for me.
I was going to say, as a producer, I'm like, you're talking my language. I feel you 100%. Yeah.
Because otherwise, here's the worst thing for a creative.
Okay.
And I hear it all the time. Hey, Shingy, we're going to start with a blank page. What I'd rather hear is, what is the problem we're trying to solve?
Oh, absolutely.
The best creativity happens when you're solving a problem, not
Yes.
nothing is off limits. That means we're creating nothing. We need those boundaries so we can think outside them.
Yes.
Because otherwise you're just inside them thinking about, you'll end up with something that is less dynamic if it's blank.
Okay. So inside this weekend for Inside Design, we had the opportunity to take participants to the Obama Presidential Center.
Sure.
And there was a conversation curated between the architect for Moody Nolan, Renald Mitchell, and the artist Dorian Sylvain, who did the mural inside of Home Courts. And so in that design infrastructure, neither of them worked together, but they both started with that Home Courts starts with this basketball hoop is inspiration of the game of basketball. And so that's the thread that they had. We're gonna build upon this net. We're gonna weave it through the design. So without them having a direct conversation, they still had the same goal. And that goal lended itself to this beautiful kind of creative space. So that's one experience. There was an experience at Steppenwolf, which was cool because there we're talking about a world being created with people that are in theater, but all facets, the lighting, the production design, right? The costuming, the sound, to create an imagined whole cohesive world. And so there were designers in the audience who asked, our work is pretty siloed. So what would you say? How would we come together? Because our work is more siloed. And what the Steppenwolf artist said is that what you just said, we start with a shared goal. We know what the outcome is going to be, and we're all in the same place, and we're collaborating. And I thought that was interesting because any sort of production is pretty siloed in that it's focused, but all of the people are focused on that one goal. And so I just thought it was interesting to hear you say that, because that is how some people in design think. And of course, everyone is going to have different thoughts, but everyone having the same goal and bringing their gifts is very different than doing a project and we're going to start from scratch and bring these different ideas with possibly different goals, different outcomes that we desire.
You know what's interesting about that? Well, as you were describing it, I was thinking about hub and spokes.
Yeah.
And it's actually not, I'm going to change that and say, I don't think that is really the right analogy. It's more like overlaps. And overlapping pancakes will do.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's lunchtime.
And you're real hungry. Yeah.
But what's interesting about that analogy is that a lot of things will then overlap into someone else's culture. And that'll influence, perhaps, the element of what they might be an expertise in to help them create better charisma in the output. And that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because that then becomes influence, like real influence, as opposed to I'm a subject matter expert, this is my... But when people ask me dynamically, how do you create culture? For me, it's like get out of your category. Understand what people are listening, where they're consuming, how they're reading, what are they listening to. And that's where you create something, and that's where you feel something different. And we saw some of that earlier today with momentum and hip-hop. And you end up with something that feels like, in a conservative space, you can end up with a dynamic relationship to the surroundings simply by the dynamic design that's on the sofa you're sitting on.
Absolutely.
And you don't understand that the DNA of that thing is threaded through music. You're going to feel it because it's designed that way, and you didn't know that. That's what I mean by curation, by the way.
Absolutely.
So that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can have a blank page, but it's so much better when maybe somebody's orchestrating it for you and you end up with a DNA thread.
Absolutely.
And that DNA thread came from something that was charged. You know it.
Yeah.
And in the world of physical, that's sensorial. You get it, man. In digital, you don't. You don't know what you're feeling. And we moved away from a world of facts to a world of feel. Everything feels like, hey, man, I'm feeling this. Really?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. It's a different, more sort of dynamic environment where collaboration becomes more critical.
Yeah.
Because it helps you create something that feels more culturally relevant and therefore more instinctively intuitive. And therefore somebody feels like they could take ownership for it. Because ultimately, if you're going to have somebody blend their world, and their world overlaps into their work and play, you want them to take ownership in it so they feel like they're part of the dynamicism and they're not just receiving it.
Absolutely.
And that should happen in the physical. And it doesn't happen by design.
Design, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we've touched on quite a bit. Gave people lots to noodle on. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here, sharing. Yeah, I mean, you've been extremely generous. So for those of you listening in, Shingy wrapped up his keynote today, and he has been extremely generous with his time, opened up his world. We're having students here for Student Day. He went in and shared time with them, so it's been a pleasure. Now he's walking the halls of the Mart and just kind of taking everything in. So, yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. So before we sign off, though, what's been the most interesting thing for you this week?
Oh, my gosh, the most interesting?
Give me two.
I would have to say, you know, we spend the entire year, NeoCon, working on, the next one.
Sure.
It's seeing people's joy. And so people coming up and expressing how much they appreciated the work for the Obama panel, but also the tour that I mentioned as well, Steppenwolf. That one really for me was a bright spot because since my mind works to see connections and patterns, and people often ask me, they're like, how did you get here? And I'm like, well, my background is in production and I'm a producer, but I love design. It touches everything. And so I can see the parallels and connection. And I think being able to draw inspiration from other facets of life, other people's work, and see how it relates to yours, and take something that maybe you didn't think applied, but it'll help make your life better is helpful. And so seeing the designers, NeoCon attendees, and the production crew at Steppenwolf engage in this interplay and really be excited, that I love that. I mean, this has been a really great show for me, being able to be outside of and get to see more of the showroom floors. Really delighted with the partnership that we have with Design Milk and the great talks that people are able to deliver. And to what we've been talking about, just share more of them. Kristen Cerruti sharing her story of living with an autoimmune condition and shifting her philosophy from, as a designer, designing for the clients, but instead design for you and for what you need, because there's probably another you out there that needs to be considered. So many bright spots. So many.
I'll finish off by saying that I had to think about NeoCon. It's a very interesting name. I like the dynamic nature of NeoCon.
Yes.
But I wanted to reframe it, which is kind of just a thing that I do in life generally. And I started off by saying it's really about negotiating context. That's my NeoCon, negotiating context. And for me, because things are so dynamic and things are changing so quickly, how do you negotiate the context? Because at the end of the day, it's human after all.
This season of NeoConversations is sponsored by IDCEC. This episode is hosted and editorially produced by Nubia Henderson, with audio production by Rob Schulte for NeoCon and the Surround Podcast Network. Listen now on surroundpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcast.